listening to the live broadcast. Am I live? Am I live? Say something, I'm giving up on you. Let me know when it pops up on your, hello? Hello? Can anybody hear me? Let me know if it pops up on your YouTube. Say something, am I live? Hello, I am Ransom Ryder. I'm hanging out in my kitchen and I just wanted to come in. I'm testing my equipment, right? I'm gonna be live streaming in my kitchen I'm live streaming right now, but a series of, Mountain Comes to the City. And many of you have already seen my channel, Ransom Ryder Cooks, Ransom_Ryder Cooks. Many of you know me from my gaming channel, Ransom_Ryder, where I've been gaming through Destiny 1, Destiny 2, and I've been there for many, many years, many years. Now, with me here in the studio, I have via satellite, Havoc Otter, and in the studio, a friend of mine, Val. Val, hello, thank you for hanging out with me today. So, a little bit about myself. I know you're curious, right? You're curious. I need to make some tea though, right? I want to make some tea. So, I love to drink tea, but back to me, as I make tea, hang out with me, because I do need some friends. It's been sparse around here, and I need to make some friends in the kitchen. Nobody wants to cook for one. It's hard to cook for one. I want to be able to cook for several. But I'm making some winter spice tea. I have really had some of this shipped in, a couple of cases of it. So several hundred packs. I'm gonna be drinking winter spice tea for a couple of months anyway. But about me, I grew up in the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, the Appalachian Mountain Range, but specifically the Smoky Mountains. And I grew up in a little bitty town, population about 500 names, and I loved it. I really did like it. And part of my growing up really was access to lots of fresh vegetables, lots of fresh fruits, just produce galore. And ultimately, when I look back at it, the grocery store that we had access to was really kind of small. I'm thinking it was like 3,000 square feet at the most, Tip of the day, a lemon can be the outside peel, the rind can be hard, and it can still be beautiful and juicy on the inside. This has got a few seeds, but I've got a strainer. And I do like the entire lemon in my tea. This winter spice, give me the whole lemon. But back to my hometown in Western North Carolina, I didn't realize growing up just how great I had it. I didn't know, into the floor. I didn't know how great it really was, because when we went to the table to eat a meal, everything was recognizable. There was not a lot of processed foods. Probably the most processed food that we had at the table, mashed potatoes. I really think that probably was the most, I'm getting directions from the producer of the show. Thank you, Mr. Producer. Now, I say that, and it's really just friends hanging out with me. They said, move this out of the way. All right, get my lemon in there and save those. And a tea kettle, you gotta have one. If you don't have a tea kettle, you need a tea kettle. So don't turn your back to the camera. I've been told that. Smile and pronounce my T's. All right, that is in. And I like for the tea bags to steep for about 3 to 4 minutes, maximum of 5. Get that flavor out. But if you leave the tea bags in for too long, you're gonna get a really strong, perhaps bitterness to your tea. Nobody wants bitter tea. Nobody. So I would stay with my grandparents a lot and absolutely love staying with them. if you've watched my channel, you're not supposed to squeeze your tea bags. I did anyway. I can't help myself. Don't squeeze them because you could burst them and you could get a lot of tea leaves. It would ruin it. Now, don't come at me because I use a big dollop, okay, 2 big dollops of honey. And back home, that's how we took the honey from the side of the jar, lick your finger, and put the lid back on. That way, it doesn't really create a mess in there. All right, I need a napkin. So I would go to the table and it would be filled with all kinds of wonderful. When you've got a glass jar or a glass drinking, you don't put metal in there to stir it. I know from experience, if any of you have heard my tea pitcher story, I broke several tea pitchers by stirring the sugar with a metal utensil in a glass jar. Don't do that. All right, I'm using a wooden stirrer to get the tea going. This is hot, but it's so warm here today. I actually should have, iced tea, and I've got an iced tea on standby right over there, just in case I get overheated. But I would, back to the story, land the plane, Sylvia. I would go into the table, everything was recognizable, and at least to, people that grew up in the mountains, right? Some things you might not know. But, some squash you might not know. There's things that you're not familiar with depending on your location for many of us. But I would go in, know all of it, know that I probably helped raise some of it, helped pick some of it, and stayed in with my grandparents to learn a lot about produce, because every time we stepped into the garden, I'm going to get these plantains out of the way. Every time that I stepped into the garden, it was an adventure. My grandparents had a phenomenal knack of being able to lead you into the garden, and it never felt like work. It was always a big adventure. You would learn about the crops that were being grown. You would learn about the insects in the garden, the beneficial ones like the ladybug, harmful ones like a June bug. So it was always a big adventure, and I just loved it. Part of the garden was for produce, vegetables, that kind of thing. And then like the front half, 1/4, I would say, the front 1/4 of the garden was kept in flowers. Just gobs of wildflowers, so many varieties, hundreds of varieties. It was just filled with flowers. It was an ocean of flowers. And my grandparents loved that because it kept the bees coming back, it kept them happy, and you needed the bees to help pollinate your crops, especially, any of those crops like the corn, the green beans. Those bees had to get in there and work. Bzz, bzz, bzz. And I knew that honeybees were friend. They were friend. I still... Oh, no, I don't see chat, but if somebody's got a question, I will... does somebody have a question? Kevin, Kevin, thank you for your support, Mr. Producer. Thank you for the phone. Yeah, I should have thought about that, Kevin. I should have had chat with me. Joanne, welcome. It's good to see you. Havoc, thank you so much. I don't see Vol on here. Vol, you should say hello. Hello, hello. Oh, is he here? Hello, Michael. How are you? Hanging with Michael. So, yeah, growing up in the mountains, I was privileged and just didn't know it. I did not know it. I loved coming in from school, getting access to all that stuff. And then we actually canned a lot of that produce, those vegetables, those fruits. They were preserved for long winters, and my grandparents did not really depend on the grocery store. Mm. Oh man, my gosh, that is hot. Woo. I need to add some honey to that, a little bit more. That could be muted. A little bit more honey because I do like it sweet, but I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it. So one day, all this garden stuff, fresh produce, fantastic food. My grandmother got up early every single morning. It was really early, like 5:30 a.m., 5 a.m. And immediately she went into the kitchen and she started prep. And early on in my life, they had a wood burning stove for heat. So my grandfather would actually get up a little bit earlier because my grandmother in the wintertime, she wanted the house warm. I mean, hot. And she would get up and start breakfast. My grandfather would already have that fire going. He would start it with a few little chunks of coal, and then he would put kindling in it and just get it really going. The coal burned really hot, so it warmed the house up immediately. And often my grandmother would put water on the stove, or she would put a pot of beans on the stove. She really utilized the stove not only as a source of heating for the home, but as an additional stove to cook on because it definitely could boil a pot of beans really fast. But as I grew up, I never really thought anything about the location that I was in. It was a paradise. Hunting, fishing, hiking, canoeing, swimming, river rafting. If you love the outdoors, still to this day, my hometown is an oasis. It's a paradise from April to 1st of November. Beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And it has a reputation for that. So it's really has a lot of people there during those fantastic months. And, I often say to folks in my hometown, the native population cannot support 15 gas stations. They just can't. There's not enough of them to keep those gas stations in business. It's the tourism that keeps all those gas stations in business. And certainly hanging with Michael and Havoc Otter, who's in chat, they've been to my hometown. Joanne, of course, knows all about my hometown. But that's why, jump forward a few years, that's why, well, many years, okay, let's just be direct. I earned this gray hair and my gray beard. I can play Santa in the Christmas parade, and someday maybe I will. But I moved in to the big city many years ago, and recently, like in the last few years, I really wanted to focus on recipes that I loved growing up and to look at some of the recipes, some of the foods that I did not like growing up. Now, if you see behind me, you will see right over here, you will see a couple of fermentation jars. I have corn, I have cabbage. The cabbage will turn into kraut. If I'm lucky, fingers crossed, knock on wood, will turn into kraut. And the corn will become what we called back home pickled corn. And pickled corn is actually fermented. And it has like a sour kick to it, like kraut or a relative to kimchi, because I've also made a lot of kimchi. I'm going to get another sip of this. It's so good. It's so good. But one day, I'm going to tell you this little story. Remember, this is just a test. This is a test. One day in the 4th grade, I knew that my grandparents had fresh okra. And we called it okra. That's, Southern Mountain, Smoky Mountain term for okra. O-K-R-A. And I loved it. I loved it fried. And I knew that my grandparents had picked a fresh batch of okra early that morning. They always liked to gather the vegetables and the fruits early in the day before the sunshine got to them. They kept a crispness about them that way. And I knew that day it was going to be mashed potatoes. The potatoes were straight out of the garden, fried okra, and then there was going to be fried chicken, and it was fresh chicken. It was fresh. And I thought, oh man. And I knew that my grandmother, who I called Mommy, my grandfather, I called Paul, I knew that they'd made tea that day. She'd been in the kitchen. She had a wonderful, sweet, Southern style tea, 2 cups of sugar per gallon. So I told my 4th grade teacher, Miss Blankenship, thank you. I told my 4th grade teacher, I want to go home for lunch. And we called lunch supper. And supper, which you would think would be late in the evening, we called that dinner. So we had breakfast, supper, and dinner. And usually dinner was a light snack. There was no cooking, late in the evening. And supper was always around 11 to 11:30 every single day before the heat of the day kicked in, because my grandfather did not want air conditioning. They had giant big maple trees in the front that kept the house cool, and she wanted all the cooking and everything completed before the day heated up. But my teacher said, well, how far away is your grandparents' house? It's just real close, isn't it? And I said, yeah, it's just right over here, not far away at all, about 1/4 of a mile. And she said, you go on and eat with your grandparents. So in the 4th grade, as a small youngin', I hit the road and walked to my grandparents' house for lunch when the other students went to the cafeteria to eat. And I was thrilled. I remember that day heaping my plate up with okra and then covering the okra with mashed potatoes and having a big glass of iced sweet tea. It was a fantastic meal. So those little journeys, I cannot imagine. There is no way possible today that a student would be able to leave, especially a 4th grader, would be able to walk off the school grounds and walk home for lunch. And I actually think that probably in many schools back in those days, people, if they lived close by, like they could go home for lunch. I remember a couple of the students that I was in class with their families lived even closer to the school, and they'd go home every day for lunch. Just, walk down the street and go home for lunch. Just unimaginable today. And I don't think, if I had a lot of children today, they would not be walking anywhere for lunch. I can assure you they would not. They'd have to sneak out to get away for lunch. Let me get a little more tea. Jason, hello, hello. Superman, hello, hello. So just a really privileged childhood. My grandparents made sure that I was given cooking lessons. They wanted me, Kevin, hello. They wanted me to be able to be on my own. They didn't want me to have to depend on a restaurant or someone else to cook for me. So I had cooking lessons when I was very young. I knew how to get around in the kitchen because whenever possible, my grandmother would pull me in and say, this is how we do these. This is how we preserve vegetables and fruits. So I got lessons every weekend that I was able to stay with them. And they've hung with me. And I'm hoping that on this cooking channel, now listen, be sure to like, subscribe, share it with your friends. I'm going to need some friends over here. They would have loved this cooking channel. And they would have got right in here in the kitchen with me, and we would have had a blast. Because just like the garden, the adventure in the kitchen was always fun and informative. It was a learning experience. It never felt like work. So with that in mind, come and hang out with me, share some of your recipes, check out some of my other videos, and just have a good time with me, because that's what it's all about. It's having a good time with friends. I'm going to drink a little more. Kat, how are you? I know you shared some information with me on my gaming channel, and you have been in my thoughts So, Kat, I will be in gaming. Hopefully tomorrow, I'll be back in Destiny, and I would love for you to stop by because you have been in my thoughts after that information you shared with me. So, Adventures in the Kitchen. I have a little cookbook. Years ago, I was down in South Carolina, and I picked up. I keep thinking I have an overhead camera, but it's just front facing for this live stream right now. But I picked up this little cookbook. It was actually gifted to me, and it's a lot of much older recipes. And I've been going through it, and I am just loving it. Old fashioned fried apple pies, apple tarts, peach cobbler, peach and apricot cobbler, and here's something called company eggs. So I've actually read through every single page of this. Much of it is familiar to me, and a lot of it's not. But I'm excited to be able to just have this little recipe book. I thought I had misplaced it because I did get this many years ago back when I was working in the real world, and it was gifted to me by the Savannah History Museum. Savannah History Museum, thank you for this cookbook. And I want to go through it and share some of those recipes. So, with that in mind, I'm Ransom Ryder. This is Ransom underscore Ryder Cooks. Each and every one of you, thanks for coming in to hang out with me. And let's get started in the kitchen with some of these fantastic recipes. Going up on my channel will be the sauerkraut, the fermented corn. It will be going up on my channel, and those will be in multi-part because you prepare everything and then you have to let it ferment, 7, 10 days, 15 days, depending on how much the sour that you want in it. And I do love the corn, just very sour. So I've got a lot of stories about my childhood, about life growing up in the mountains, and I've got a lot of recipes that I want to share with you guys. So I'm hoping, we'll see what happens with this channel. If nothing else, I'll document some of the recipes for future generations, and perhaps they can refer to my channel if they're curious how to make leather breeches, which I have on this channel, or if they want to make pickled beans and corn. It will be here for a future generation because I know that I would love to have had my grandparents on video, on YouTube, talking about their life, because they were Victorians. My grandfather was born in the late 1800s, my grandmother soon after that. So they were full force, full Victorians, and life was just different from them. I mean, no cell phones, no Wi-Fi. My hometown, very limited access to outside media. Like the wind had to be blowing in the right direction for TV channels to come in or for radio to come in. So it was very isolated. Now, having said that, my grandfather went as far as he could in school for his region. But my grandmother started cooking really early. She was so young that they had to put a footstool in front of the ovens for her to be able to cook because her father, I mean, this just seems unbelievable to me today. Her father did what was called broke up housekeeping. And for years, I had heard my grandmother say that her father broke up housekeeping. I didn't know exactly what that meant until my adult life. And I asked my sister, I'm like, what does she mean he broke up housekeeping? He opened the door one day, told all 12 children, goodbye, you're going to have to make it on your own. No matter the ages, no matter the ages. And my grandmother, who was about age 3, ended up walking down to someone that she knew, and she cooked, cleaned, and worked for them as a child. So she didn't really get to spend her early years in any type of formal education. She taught herself to read and write. But my grandfather, he did go as far as he could go in school. during that time period. And both of them, they were super smart about that stuff.
Cat wants to know, did anybody in your family have a ham radio back in the day?
Cat, no. Cat, that's a good question. There were no ham radios, and I don't even think a signal could have got in. They Because ham radios depend upon repeated signals and proximity of another ham radio operator. And I think ham radio really gained a lot of popularity in the early 70s, late 60s, but my area just simply did not have ham radio. Now, a friend of mine in the 70s actually had a truck that had a CB radio in it. And I just remember searching the channels and never being able to find anyone, nothing that could be picked up. I'm not sure how the distance that a ham radio or a shortwave frequency would travel, because the mountains where I grew up, it was like this, and we were nestled in a little valley. So everything just went right over us. It just went right over us. And we just didn't have it. But I think it would be fun to maybe talk to some other people in the area. But I don't remember anybody having it. I know that when we would go school shopping for back to school, it would take us several hours to get to a city where we could do back to school shopping. And I would go through the lunchbox aisle. And in those days, your lunch boxes were like metal tin boxes that were square, and then they were painted. And I remember seeing all these scenes on the lunch boxes and having no idea like what the scenes depicted. Every once in a while on a Saturday, I might be able to get an animated series, a cartoon, or on occasion, I would see, we'd get TV. We'd all join hands and we'd get a piece of tin foil and we'd all do this and try to get a signal if we knew that something was going to be coming on. So it was something. It was something else that today, I don't think people understand the level of isolation. So you had to know your neighbors, you had to know other folks within your region. And when the phones came to the area where I lived, it was a shared party line. So if you picked up the phone to make a call, you might have had to say, Ethel, would you mind if I make a call? And Ethel might say, well, just give me 5 more minutes. And you'd have to hang up and pick it back up 5 minutes later and say, I really need to make a call. And if you knew them well enough, you'd say, like, Ethel, get off here. You've been on here for hours today. So even the phones were very limited, and many of the people in my area did not have access to a telephone. We had a television in the living room, one TV, and that TV didn't get anything. Now, for Christmas one year, I did get an Atari, like 2600, and it had Pong. And I just remember playing it for 5 or 15 minutes and thinking, nah, this can't compete with the streams outside, the mountains, and all the activities that we had. So it did not keep me indoors. On the weekends, if I wasn't with my grandparents, we went out early and we came back late. My parents had a rule: take a shower and get to bed, and be sure that you get yourself up to go to school on Monday and through the week. If not, we'll get up and we will get you up. So, but often they were working and they weren't there. So I got up on my own, took my shower, got dressed, and went on to school. So life was very different. But any questions that you have, any recipes that you'd like to share from your family, come on in and hang out and we'll share them and talk about the good times. Mm.
Our mantis said he used to go home from school, but that was back in the 70s and 80s. And he also asked, did you grow up with many siblings?
Well, good question. I had siblings, And my sister, I had two sisters and one brother, all older than me, and we're spaced 4 years basically apart. Everyone's 4 years apart. And my sisters, I was very close with them for the most of my life, but now we're all separated by distance. But my brother just never, we never had any connectivity. There was never a spark of brotherhood or friendship. It just was a total, just was a total disaster for my brother and I think probably for several of my family members. He just wasn't involved in any of our lives, and he was very separate, and just he just lived by a different path. He walked to the beat of a different sound. So we never got close, and I've gone years and years without ever seeing him, speaking to him. And the sad part about that is, because I never knew about my brother a lot of what his life was about, I haven't missed it. Now, in my mind, I've often thought it would have been so nice to have a brother to be close to have, a family member that was closest to my age that I could have hung out with. But my brother just simply was not that. And someday, when we're all sitting down and just talking about some great recipe in the kitchen, I will tell you some of the stories about my brother. But right now, I want to keep it rated. I want to stay rated G, so I don't want to tell any of the stories about him. But remind me one day, we'll talk about it. But yeah, never a shortage of food. We had chickens that provided protein, and they provided eggs. They provided feathers. I remember plucking chickens and getting those soft, downy feathers and, making our own pillows. The pillow that I kept for years, and I think my sister probably still has one, my grandmother and we plucked the feathers and handmade those pillows. And then they had a smokehouse behind their home. They smoked their own meat. They had hams, just an abundance, a plethora of different foods. And I remember being taught about how to smoke a ham, how to sugar cure a ham, how to salt cure a ham, and the preservation techniques, because when they grew up, there were no refrigerators. They did not have refrigeration. So you had to preserve all your foods if you expected to make it through the winter. And even during the Great Depression, my grandparents, because they had access to livestock and a big garden and lots of food, they really were not as, devastated by the Great Depression, like a lot of families in some areas or some of the bigger cities where it was a devastating time in our history. They did not feel that to that extent because they had an abundance of crops and livestock, plus the region offered an abundance. There were deer, there were turkey, there were wild hogs that were brought in by the Vanderbilt family in Asheville, North Carolina, the Russian boar. So there was access to all these different food sources. So the Great Depression was not as hard for them. And about the only thing that really they would buy a lot from the store would be like flour and cornmeal. They did purchase that. There was a traveling store that would come by. It was horse-drawn. The traveling store would come by and they would meet the traveling store at the end of the driveway and purchase the flour, maybe a few things that they did not raise. And I love to, think about all those times. Now, I don't remember the traveling store. I'm not, I know my beard's white, but I don't remember the traveling store. But, they did for a very long time depend on that traveling store. And then we got a grocery store built in my hometown that was probably 3,500 square feet. And there was also, they built like a lumber yard type store. Like today, it would be Home Depot. Back then, it was just a smaller, privately owned, where you could buy a 10 penny nail, a penny nail. You could buy your roofing supplies, your lumber. You could get everything that you needed to build a home at that. And then the other part of it was actually a grocery store. And just if you're curious, okay, this is if you're really curious about it, Jodie Foster, way back in the 90s, made a movie called Nell, Nell. I think Jodie might have won, she got an Academy nomination, but go check out Nell. That is my hometown, and that's the grocery store that she shops in. And it was open until just maybe like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It closed maybe 3 or 4 years after the movie Nell, or 5 years after the movie Nell was made. But that movie, that's my hometown. Check it out. So good food, good times, close family, big holidays together. Everybody was in the kitchen. They cooked. They made their favorite recipes. My grandmother never had a recipe in front of her. Everything that she made, it was in her mind. She kept it with her. She never pulled out a recipe book. There were no recipe books. Remember, she did not go to school, although she could read and write, but she never had any written recipes. So I have to utilize just what I remember from working with my grandparents and also my parents. But they both worked. My father often was away from home, and my mother worked. She got up really early and came back in after I got in from school. So it left me on my own for many, many years. So I just want to reiterate, come in, hang out. Let's exchange some stories. Let's be friends. Let's talk about the recipes, the good times, what makes family important. So many good times with my family were shared via a great meal. You know, the great meals brought us together, and we shared stories, and they were just important. I'm Ransom Ryder. This is going to be one of my favorite channels, cooking. But for all you gamers out there, don't ever think that I've abandoned my love of gaming. I'll be seeing you very soon. If you're new to my channel, be sure to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, come hang out with me. And it's not always going to be bright and sunny. You know, we'll talk about some of the more difficult situations that life can throw at you in the kitchen. I've had some disastrous recipes, and sometimes the disasters give you the tools that are necessary to create something really great. So I look forward to seeing you soon on my channel. And thank you guys for hanging out with me. I'll see you soon. Bye. Bye. Any final questions for anybody? Anyone that wants to holler at me, leave me a note after the live stream. Today was a test run. I hope to maybe get a second overhead camera. I will start cooking. We'll start doing some recipes live. YouTube tells me I need to cook outside. I need to cook while taking adventures. I need to have foods that are going to be just mind-boggling, spectacular, with recipes you've never seen before. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I was speaking with Vol and Havoc this morning and said, maybe I need to hit the park and take a frying pan and a camp stove with me just to try to meet the algorithm's expectations. Anyway, we'll talk about it. I'll see you soon. Bye. Bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Here's to you. Whatever you're drinking, drink with me. Bye.